Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk all about Dazzler. And now I know Dazzler is a pretty decent standalone character, and there's been already content made about her from that perspective. And on the APK, I tried her out with the CTP of Rage, and she was actually pretty good. But I don't think that most people are going to be investing in Dazzler for her potential as a character. I think most people are going to be investing for Dazzler for Enchanting Stage, and that is the Mutant Allies buff. So it's a support buff that gives all mutant allies, whether they're heroes or villains. This applies to both Namor with or without uniform, Magneto and Professor X, etc. Ignore dodge by 70%, which is godly for the Corvus World Boss Ultimate Stage and the Quicksilver World Boss Ultimate Stage, because it ignores everyone's dodge. And then it also increases damage dealt to boss types by 65%. Now, we don't have data, we don't have like hard data, and it would be great if the devs would clear this up for us. We don't really know exactly what boss types mean. Now, I'm going to take a stab at what boss types mean, and it kind of makes sense. It's just mostly PvE content, so I'm pretty sure boss types would refer to the Searcher boss at the end of Squad Battle in the 3rd phase. All of the world bosses, whether they're heroes or villains, Quicksilver, Scarlet, and Cable are heroes. You can't use Shuri's buff or Coulson's buff against them. Just a guaranteed crit rate for Coulson, but I digress. So, but because they're all world bosses, they're all also bosses. And then I would also guess that the Alliance Battle Frost Beast would be a boss. I don't think bosses are going to be people that you fight, other alliances, other teams, other players in Timeline Battle or Conquest. I'm not sure if actually I do think that bosses also refer to World Boss Invasion, because World Boss Invasion just took the world bosses and shrunk them down and made them easier, in addition to World Boss Raid, or sorry, not World Boss Raid, World Boss Raid? Giant Boss Raid. So Giant Boss Raid and World Boss, I think, are the two most popular pieces of PvE content, so that is where I tested her. Again, I haven't had enough time yet to test her extensively and exhaustively in all of these different game modes, so I would love to see if anyone has testing in Squad Battle with her, or other game modes. Unfortunately, with the current restrictions on Squad Battle, the only mutant stage is unavailable to her because it's Speed Mutant, which is super annoying. And then the only Blast female stage is Human, so she's also not available for that. So basically, the only stage you could use her on would be this stage here. Now, I actually will give it a crack, because I usually use Namor with Ghost Panther lead for the support and the leadership. And then I actually usually use Valkyrie for the buff, the support buff, and the CTP of Insight. But I want to know, I'm curious if Dazzler herself will be enough to either match Valkyrie or overtake Valkyrie as a support. So that's basically what I ended up testing these characters in. I ended up testing Dazzler against Phil Coulson and Valkyrie, because I consider that those two supports would be the best in the game, with Valkyrie holding a CTP of Insight. If Valkyrie doesn't have a CTP of Insight, then she's just a regular support, like Wave, like Shuri, like all these other ones. She's actually a little bit worse than Shuri defensively, but it's really the fact that she has an Insight stacking on top. So you get the 45% in addition to the 20% whenever the CTP of Insight procs. And then, of course, Coulson is the best support in the game for heroes, besides White Fox for leadership characters, or Nick Fury as a lead. As strictly a support character who's not in the leadership slot for heroes, Coulson is the best, because not only does he give you the increased damage, the 45%, like Mystique does, like Taskmaster does, but he also gives you that 20% guaranteed crit rate. Now, I had to test it with a character that didn't have guaranteed crit rate, so I couldn't test it with Cable, I couldn't test it with, other mutants like that. So I went ahead and I tested it with Professor X. And I tested it with Professor X for a couple of reasons. One, he's got a pretty straightforward rotation when you use a Rage. You sort of just spam all of the skills, so it creates a bit more of a consistent pattern where you don't have to worry about whether you're proccing on time or not. You don't have to worry about that sort of influencing the results. And Professor X also doesn't have any guaranteed crit rate or any sort of buffs that are going to interfere with either Dazzler's buff, Valkyrie's buff, or Coulson's buff. And then I also considered the fact, and I'll talk about this in the Giant Boss Raid testing a little bit more, but I also considered the fact that when you go over to Professor X, you can see that Dazzler is a striker. Now, Dazzler's a striker for almost every mutant. There's a few exceptions, but otherwise Dazzler is a striker. This is an old sort of guide list thing. Most players don't refer to this anymore because it almost never happens, and you'll see that in Giant Boss Raid. But she has apparently she has a 16% chance to appear when attacked. And what appearing means is she will strike like a striker. So even though she's on the team and she's not going to jump out unless you use the co-op skill, she will jump out when you get attacked. And I believe when she jumps out, she does her third skill. So it's a pretty intense buff if that were to happen. And so I actually did some additional testing with Cyclops because unlike Professor X, Cyclops has a when attacking buff with Dazzler. So Professor X, pretty unlikely that you're going to get hit. Dazzler's not going to come out. Cyclops, he's hitting, it's when he's attacking, so there's a much greater chance of her actually popping out and doing some damage, maybe doing her fourth skill, maybe doing her third skill if we are lucky. So first things first, we're just going to go ahead and recap the testing that I did against Ebony Maw. I did the testing against Ebony Maw because Cull Obsidian has the cleanse phase, and so the cleanse phase can make things a little bit more complicated. For Ebony Maw, because I'm still using Professor X, he's going to be mind controlled the whole time, so I don't really have to worry about him moving around anywhere. And this is where you're going to be using these two characters anyways, right? Because of the fact that Ebony Maw deals less damage, or gets dealt more damage to or by elemental characters. So here we go. We're just going to throw in a random third, which in this case is Inferno. Inferno's not actually doing anything on this team. He's just here to do nothing. So I'm just going to run through pretty quickly. I'm going to run through 30 seconds of the fight, and I'm going to see how much damage I do. I've already tested this off camera, so I know roughly what to expect, and I know roughly where Dazzler stands, but I want you guys to see it firsthand. We're going to use the exact same rotation as soon as he pops here. We're going to do everything into 5, and then we're going to sit on 5, and then we're going to go back into 1 and 2, do a little bit of auto, back into 3. He canceled my 3. There's a little bit of variance that can happen, of course, because not every run is exactly picture perfect, but we can sort of get a rough idea of how much is being added here. And we went to a reasonably high stage so that we don't, flash through the fight too fast. So we got down almost to the next phase. If I let that play out a little bit, we basically would have gotten him to his last phase where he actually does ignore you and go into his last phase transition. So that was very, very good. That was just over 30 seconds. So about the bottom of 9 bars in 30 seconds. Now let's see how he does with Coulson. Same exact setup here. So again, I know Coulson gives different buffs than Dazzler, right? 60, but we don't know. What is 60%? Or is it 60 or 65? What is 60% or 65% increased damage to boss types? We don't really have an idea of how good that is. Well, as you're going to see, it turns out that it seems to be as good as Coulson's damage buff and crit, guaranteed crit rate buff, which is pretty powerful in and of itself, and has the added flexibility of being, this actually is a much better run because he hasn't interrupted me at all, so we might actually get a little bit further with him. Yeah, we're actually going to get a lot further. So we actually got him down. We actually got him down an extra bar, an extra bar basically, because we were at the bottom of 9, which is basically the top of 8, and now we're at the top of 7, which is basically the bottom of 8. So we had a perfect run there where he didn't iframe. Remember, he iframed in the other run and interrupted my third skill, so I basically didn't get any of that damage. I don't even know if the accumulation cropped up, but essentially from my testing, Dazzler doesn't seem to be any better than Coulson. Coulson may actually be better in some situations, especially if you're using a CTP of Rage. Dazzler might be a better support if you're not using a CTP of Rage, because then you don't need to rely on the crit as much. But just for reference here, I'll show you guys what happens with Valkyrie. But this is essentially what I found from my testing. What I found when I tested Professor X against Cull and Ebony was that Dazzler was better than Valkyrie, and pretty much the same, maybe slightly better than Coulson for World Boss. Now, of course, this may change in the future, but this is just what I've discovered so far. You don't have to take what I'm saying as the absolute truth forever. We may find a better combo in the future, and I've already tried a little bit of testing with using Dazzler on a team with an all defense down character and seeing how that works, like Deadpool. Here we got really lucky again. Yeah, there may be too much variance on this team. Wow, there may be too much variance in this. This is even faster. Wow. Okay, so I was trying to speed this up for the video. Usually I was testing it in 1-minute increments rather than 30-second increments. We're getting really lucky with the all defense down. And I was actually testing it on a little bit of a higher stage, but I wanted to go a little bit faster for the sake of the video so it doesn't drag on to like 20 minutes. But now that looks like Valkyrie is better than Coulson and Dazzler. but I don't think that's the case. I think I just got luckier with the skill procking with the rage, fitting all the skills into the rage, and then also getting more crits, more crit damage, and then getting that tier 3 skill to stack up all that mind resist down. So that was a little bit less consistent. But now I want to show you guys, I want to throw up some clips of Giant Boss Raid. Big shout out to Bannerism and Meta World Peace on Discord for running with me and not doing any damage, so we can get a nice isolated look at Professor X. Again, it's really hard to test things and to test, you know, supports and damage numbers in this game because there is no sort of dummy mode. If you guys remember in Marvel Heroes Omega, Marvel Heroes, there's no sort of training mode that you can go into. We have skill preview, but there's no numbers, right? So it doesn't track any of this stuff. So I'm sort of just doing the eyeball test over and over again. From the testing that I did, despite what you saw before with World Boss, it did seem like Valkyrie was a little bit slower than Dazzler, and Dazzler and Coulson were a little bit faster. But again, you're talking like 10, 15 seconds. You're not talking like 30 seconds, 40 seconds. There's not a massive difference between these three characters, which sort of leads me to believe that Dazzler is not super necessary unless you're really trying to clear Quicksilver and Corvus World Boss, in which case Dazzler's performance will far outweigh that of Coulson or Valkyrie, because I'm ignoring the ignore dodge, because you don't need it for Cull, you don't need it for Proxima, you don't need it for Thanos, you don't need it for Ebony. But against Corvus and Quicksilver, that 70% ignore dodge on her passive is so good, it allows you to bring 3 strikers that are not. It basically allows you to swap out 3 strikers, because normally you run 4 or 5 strikers that each give 20%. You can take out 3 that give 60%, and you still have an extra 10%, which is bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. So you could technically just bring 1 ignore defense or ignore dodge striker like Black Widow, and then the rest of the strikers could be mind control, all defense down, and then extra damage. So that value is just uncalculable. Like, obviously, Dazzler would be the #1 support for any mutant you are using, whether it's Namor against Quicksilver, or whether it's, you know, Deadpool against Corvus, right? Any mutant that you're using against Corvus or Quicksilver, of course, Dazzler rises to the top and becomes the #1 support striker, or the #1 support character for that. But as you can see in this run against Galactus, I'm doing 100% of the damage, which I was able to do in 3 minutes with Professor X, Dazzler, and Nick Fury. And again, I tried to stick to the exact same rotation. Dazzler never popped up, despite the fact that I was hit by Galactus quite a few times, and so I ended up finishing the fight in 3 minutes. Conversely, when I went ahead and did Nick Fury, Professor X, and Coulson, it went a little bit faster. Now, it was only about 5 seconds faster. I also believe that I was a little bit luckier with the sort of positioning of Galactus and when he changed phases. So I actually think that this fight would have been slower if I had gotten the sort of timing RNG of the previous fight. And for those of you that have played enough GBR, you sort of know what I mean. Sometimes Galactus will just decide to end the phase early and he'll interrupt your skill and you'll do less damage. Sometimes he just takes longer, or he sits in a phase for much longer, and so you can do a lot more damage to him during that phase. So it's actually interesting to note here that Dazzler became a much better support against Galactus than the world bosses, because not only is Coulson giving you the crit damage, the crit rate, and the damage buff, but Coulson has a 5% all attack bonus with Nick Fury. So Dazzler is able to match or beat all of that with just her extra 60 or 65% increased damage to boss types. So it seems to be a 65%. It seems to be a very good passive, just not, you know, head and shoulders above what we've already come to expect from Coulson. And I imagine that Coulson with an insight might actually be better than Dazzler in a lot of situations. So then, you know, seeing as the Coulson team did it in about 2 minutes and 55 seconds, I decided to test another team. And so I went back and I looked at that striker list and I decided to test Cyclops. Now, spoiler alert, Dazzler never showed up. I don't know what the hell or what the heck is wrong with that striker list. I don't know if it just doesn't apply in the game anymore, or if it's like 1.6% chance, but they say that it's 16% chance, because honestly, it almost never ever happens. But anywho, I decided to test Cyclops, Ghost Panther, Dazzler versus Cyclops, Ghost Panther, Valkyrie. So I swapped out Coulson because, of course, he doesn't apply to villains like Cyclops, Phoenix 5, and Valkyrie has the CTP of Insight. This one was a much more resounding victory for Valkyrie, which confused the hell out of me. It really did. I expected Dazzler to outperform Valkyrie, but Valkyrie does have not only the buff, but also the Insight CTP. So it seems that those two things together are adding up to be as good, if not better. Again, I think my RNG was better in the Valkyrie fight, than it was in the Dazzler fight, but Valkyrie was almost 30 seconds faster than Dazzler. Now, you can chalk some of that up to RNG, you can chalk some of that up to Galactus healing and stuff like that, but yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of that. It seemed a lot more clear-cut with Professor X, or at least clear-cut in the sense that they were the same, and so then I expected Dazzler to be better than Valkyrie, but then she wasn't better than Valkyrie. Yes, I switched my main DPS. I didn't think it was going to have that much of an impact, and I was hoping to see Dazzler pop out at least once to help Cyclops, because then that would have probably sealed the deal and Dazzler would have been way faster. But yeah, so ultimately, I think what this concludes is that if you're not trying to fight, like I said, if you're not trying to push Corvus or Quicksilver World Boss, and if the devs don't introduce a new piece of content that requires a lot of ignore dodge, I think you can safely skip Dazzler for now if you're just looking for support. She is very good, but I think we just have enough supports now that you can manage. I think maybe if you don't have any CTPs of Insight, she's more tantalizing, and you may want to consider getting her. But I think if you have Insight CTPs and you have them on these support characters already, and you have White Fox, you have Coulson, Shuri, Valkyrie, you may just not have space for her. But the testing is still incomplete, so I can't say with 100% confidence that she's worse or the same. She may end up being better, and I just may have not found the right way of utilizing her yet. Like I said, I haven't tested her out yet in World Boss Invasion. I haven't tested her out yet. Not that you need a support for that, but I haven't tested her out for squad battle. So yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of Dazzler and the enchanting stage mechanic passive. Maybe the devs will tell us in a dev note what boss types mean and who it applies to. That would help tremendously in gauging her value. But I just wanted to try and gauge her value for you guys so that you can see as a support type, rather than just doing some content with her beating some world bosses and yada yada yada. Anywho, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.